Hi, everyone. This is Kim Schmidt with Farm Equipment Magazine. Today's Thought Leader series is with Greg Martinelli, who operates Ag Sales Professional, which is a training, sales training, coaching, and speaking organization that focuses on the ag industry. So thank you, Greg, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on. Excited to talk with you, Kim.
All right. So wanted to talk to you a little bit about some advice for dealerships and their sales team. So my first question for you was why relationship skills are, more important than ever in the current environment we're working with right now.
Sure. So, obviously this is a situation that nobody in the working world has ever faced, and it's more emotional probably than anything we've ever faced. So the economic downturn in both the world economy and the ag economy has made it very difficult. And so whenever that happens, they're getting hit on all fronts. And so I think as a salesperson, you have a very limited amount of time because we're all isolated and we can't go on farm when we want to. So you have a very limited amount of time to get out there and work with a producer. And part of that needs to be understanding the emotional side of what's going in through their thought process. And, as many of the articles out there, including some that you've ran, the mental health of farming and even in agribusiness. I haven't talked a lot about agribusiness, but in farming has been very tough. And when farmers have it tough, so do agribusinesses. Mm-hmm. So I think whenever you're selling into a tough market, knowing the emotional side of what's going on is key to how they're making a decisions and whether they're making good decisions.
Okay. And then if a salesperson was going to focus on just one skill to improve, what would you suggest that be?
Yeah. Along the lines of the first question, I think one of the greatest skills, of course, you want to learn all the basic selling skills of how to ask good questions and closing skills and all that. But once you get beyond that, I think one of the most important skills a person can learn, and I got to tell you, I do work with and sell the product, but it's a disc profile. And so understanding the 4 different quadrants, and if somebody's not familiar, they should Google disc. You can get access to it just about anywhere. There's a lot of people out there who sell disc assessments, and it's understanding, though, how people react under stress. When a person gets under stress, they go to their core quadrant. And so I think that's one of the most important things a person can learn is someone who is in the control quadrant, when they're in a situation like this, is under a lot of stress because they want to make choices and do what they want to do, and they can't change the world. It's right. We're isolated in quarantine, and you got to pretty much obey that rule. And so that person reacts a lot more stressful and differently than the person who goes with the flow and or that needs a lot of data, or that wants to be, have a lot of impact with people. So I think that is the one skill. And I always like to give, extra for the questions and for my customers and for you in answering this. And I thought about this. And the one thing I think the next skill that a person needs to learn right now, this is probably the biggest thing that they can do for their customers. And that is to focus on a way forward. This becomes really difficult. You talk about the animal production facilities and even the crop production time for situation right now. They're having a lot of difficulty, but they don't need, and I talk about, I have a discussion I do where it's called, they need you now more than ever before, because they've got plenty of bad news in the market. Mm-hmm. And they don't need another person to come out there. And I know why we do it. We go out, we try to connect and commiserate and connect them with the customers, but they really don't need another person to do that. They get plenty of that with their family and their friends and their neighbors and at the coffee shop, if they can still go to a coffee shop. Yeah. But I think to come out there and at least not join in that situation and be a show them a path, show them some options, some way of bringing your expertise that you can help them move just a little bit, just at least not a negative, one more person piling on all the bad news, because there's plenty of it, and they don't need one more person. I think along with that as well is there's a famous thing called the Stockdale Principle, or paradox, And that was named after, you can Google that, and it's named after Admiral Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And that is that, we may come out of this in a couple of weeks. We're starting to come out right now, and then go right back in to quarantine. And that can be mentally as challenging as it has been for 2 months. And we've all been challenged because I get up every week and I travel to sales training meetings or presentations. And I've been, I work from home. I'm used to working from home, but I'm not used to staying home. And so, the thought of going back through another 2 or 3 months of this would be very difficult. But the Stockdale Principle basically said, never give up on the fact that you're going to overcome this difficulty, but always face the brutal reality of what you're dealing with. And that is, we may be dealing with this for longer than what we think. We thought it was March, then we thought April, now we're in May. Are we going to go back in? And so I think for your customers, if you can prep them with, if they think, well, we're going to go right back to normal, I always say, so did our parents after World War II, and so did us after 9/11. We thought, well, the airports will calm down, we'll go back, and then they're not. And so we may have a situation where we have to deal with this longer than, so to mentally prepare yourself for those two things, I think is extremely important.
Okay. That actually ties in nicely to my next question. So we've been in a prolonged downturn in the ag economy. Now we're dealing with all this stuff related to the coronavirus. How can dealers help keep their sales teams motivated? And maybe even more than just their sales teams, kind of everyone at the dealership for that matter.
Sure. I think these are really important and things that I don't see a lot of in the media, the ag media and stuff like that is how do you, what do you do with your sales team? They're sitting on the sidelines waiting to get out there. Some of them have had to go out. As far as the agronomy teams, they had to get out and start doing their tasks. But, I think one of the keys that during any crisis that a leader, an owner of a store can do, and that is to communicate. Even if you don't have anything new to say, it's just the fact that you've come together some way, and now we do it through webinars, but that there's routine checking in of what's going on. Even no news is better than not having. So that routine, because right now we have a lot of chaos. We don't know whether we're going to get back together, whether we're not going to have, where we're going to have meetings in July. Are we going to, how is everything going to work? And so just knowing and hearing from the leader at a time when things are chaotic gives them that consistency. Hey, every week we're going to check in for 20 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is that you're going to have access to. So I think that's one of them, one of those areas where you can provide that. The second thing I think you can do is engage the team in the new structure. One of the difficulties is to know what's going to be the new normal. Are we going to go back to, I always say, will we ever shake hands again? And you and I came out of this, our grandkids will be laughing at us when we're scared to shake hands, 50 years from now. And, and same with my parents, went through the Depression, and, they still talk about doing things. I'm like, that never happens. We don't have a problem with banks. They stay, they don't go under, And so, so I think, engage them in what we think is the new and be able to adjust. And then I think the last thing I think that we can do is provide that positive reinforcement, just like we want the sales team to provide to customers, that eventually there's 7.5 billion people on the planet that want to eat. They don't all eat 3 times a day, but they want to eat 3 times a day. And somebody's got to make that food. And so we can't make it all in a lab. So some of it has to be grown. And I think that when it's all said and done, like right now, we have lack of meat on the shelves, but we got a lot of cattle and pigs backing up in. So somebody's going to figure out, how we're going to make those two meet in the middle. And that's a very positive that out there we are, and you can bring in stories. I think you can bring in stories of the economic downturns that we've been through. People survived through some pretty tough times, especially in ag. The 80s, I caught the very tail end of that. And then, of course, the 30s was another one that, people hearing stories of other people surviving difficult times, I think is one of those where they can realize that we're not the first people in the world to go through something as devastating as what we're going through.
I've had a few dealers tell me how, one positive, I guess, of all of this is they've kicked the salespeople out of the store. They have to be out there making calls and stuff like that. How do we ensure, and they were like, we should have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that, we keep those salespeople out making the visits and not stuck inside the dealership?
Sure. I think one of the things that will, we may get into this in a little bit, but I think one of the things that's going to come out of this is and I deal with this a lot because I go into a work with an organization and I start asking, how many salespeople do you have per whatever, per number of customers or acres or, bushels of grain that you buy or whatever it is that they've got, and trying to understand capacities. And I think salespeople should look at this time that businesses are going to renovate what they do. They're going to look at, how many salespeople we got? Do we need them all? Are they effective? Now we're in a very short window here, 60 days that we've been quarantined.
Right.
It's not fair to look at that and say, well, we got by for 60 days without making sales calls. That's a little too short notice, or short viewpoint. But I think as you look at this and say, do we need to be making the sales calls on this particular group? So I think for a salesperson, I would look at this as be very good at planning, be very good at being precise, concise, have a purpose for going there. I think it's going to actually generate better selling skills of being on the farm, because we can no longer just go out there and hang out for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, the producers are like, why are you here? Get your mask on and then get out. And if you're not, if you don't have a purpose for being there, they're not going to want you to just kind of hang around for several hours. So I think in a sense, it's going to promote some of those better behaviors. And I think it's one of those things where owners and sales managers are going to look at the evaluation of how do we manage our sales teams and evaluate who we have and how many we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what's one thing dealers should be doing right now to ensure business success in the future?
Sure. I think, I always like to give you more than you ask for. So I'll give you two, two things. And I just kind of hit on one, and that is salesperson productivity is to relook at your customer base. It is changing and being flexible in how you're implementing your sales team. You now have a chance to maybe reset. Depends on the business and the industry, but the different ag industries. But I know from a grain origination standpoint, people have said, hey, we could hardly ever get these customers and the salesperson apart. Well, now they've had to be apart. And so they've said, well, what we can do now is reset that customer base. And so I think that's one thing that they can be doing from a sales team structure. And the second thing I think that a dealership definitely needs to be looking at from a customer base is the customer experience. The entire, reducing hassles as much as possible, remaining flexible. We can't do everything we did before, but we should be able to try to remove the difficulties of doing business with us as much as possible. Speed of interacting, and obviously they know all the stuff about getting parts and service back to their customers as fast as they can. But I think the areas that you start to think about is invoicing and everything else that goes along with how can we make our experience as seamless as possible and as good as possible, and then what technology, because I called it forced technology. I mean, some producers have had to use webinar.
Right.
Some have had to get on, had to get their grandkid in and do FaceTime with somebody just so they could see them. But I think some of that's going to come around and it's going to stick. They're going to say, hey, that wasn't, typically we don't go backwards on technology. Once we learn how to, run a Zoom meeting, it's not that hard to be on a Zoom meeting. So I think once we get that down, with some customers, one of the toughest things to do with a software program when you take it out to producers was getting them to engage it and use it and adopt it into their operation. And I think now they're going to implement some of this just by necessity. So I think that's an aspect as well. Okay.
And then conversely, what's one thing dealers should not be doing right now to make sure they stay successful?
I think one of the things to not be doing. This might be something they should be doing, but it's the inflexibility in situations that usually catch. And I pull on my experience. I for many years worked with a lot of industry, a lot of businesses that got bought out. I was with a large ag company, and we went in and they had acquired this company, a smaller company, and then they merged them in. And what typically I saw is that during boom times, they expanded and got a structure, a business structure. Mm-hmm. And then when times got tough, they didn't adjust. And so the faster that you can respond and react to the new normal, whatever that normal happens to be, bigger producers buying bigger chunks of equipment versus a lot of smaller ones buying medium size. I think the more and faster you can respond to those changes, the more you stayed with the industry, because we know that we're going to plant, whatever it is, 200 million acres, and we're going to feed the world. It's just who's going to do it, on how much land do they own, and what equipment, how big will the equipment be, mm-hmm. and how many equipment dealers will it take. So I think that thought process of saying, hey, I'm going to flex with the situation. And again, that's balancing with, you got to stick it out type thing, but you got to know, okay, it's time to make that shift. In my business, they've wanted everybody to shift all over to remote webinar-based training and speaking, and it's tough. I mean, I think you need to do a little more, but It's not going to go there 100%. I think the same thing with a store. You're going to see a lot more remote activity, but it's not going to completely go there. So I think that's one of the ways that somebody shouldn't be, what things that they shouldn't be doing is remaining, here's how we do our business, and that's the way we do it, and we're going to stick with it.
Not being flexible.
Absolutely.
All right. Those were the only questions I had. Anything we might have missed that you wanted to add?
No, I always, as a trainer and a coach, I think difficulty generates opportunity, and so just like volatility is opportunity in the grain markets, and I think this is the same way. This is a time when a salesperson can really show the impact of what their value is to a customer. A lot of salespeople struggle with, well, I go out there and it's iron for iron. How do I differentiate? Well, right now, during difficult times, is the time that a salesperson can shine and do what it takes to differentiate themselves between, their competitor, whoever else that doesn't step up, and that lesson about communication goes with customers as well. Communicate with them frequently and check in on them and bring them at least a neutral message as well, but any positive message that you can bring through there. So
keep checking in with them, letting them know you're there.
Finding out what's going on with them and what they're doing to cope. I always say, salespeople, you go farm to farm to farm all day long. It's like I equate it to a doctor that goes patient to patient and treats the same disease all day. They're the greatest person to ask, how do I solve this disease? Well, this is the same way with a salesperson. It's, you go farm to farm all day long and figure out what works and what doesn't. Bring that resource to your customer, and don't discount how important that is. Obviously, you can't gossip about somebody specifically, but you can say, hey, here's what we're having success with, and here's what's not working, and they've got a wealth of information that they don't realize and don't take advantage of oftentimes. So that'd be my last parting word to the salesperson. Take this opportunity to step up and bring your resources to your customers.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much for sitting down to talk with us. We appreciate it, and always nice to catch up.
Great. Thank you, Kim.